Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by friend in life, the man who has been very busy over the weekend for all the rankings changes, none other than John Paulson. John, how's it going?
Things are picking up. I will say that there's, these older running backs are signing. There's things happening. So yeah, I've been busy with the rankings.
John, would you say it's been a quieter summer than usual, by the way? I feel like teams have gotten better at preventing training camp injuries, which is what leads to all the rankings chaos. It's been a quiet ranking summer so far. I just jinxed it. But
that voice, of course, is also our guest of honor, none other than Roto World's own Pat Daugherty. And I think I always mispronounce the Irish last name, so hopefully I got it correct that time.
You came as
your friend of 20 years now.
You came as close as humanly possible. Daugherty, I think you said. I think you added like one extra twang or like
that's just the accent.
Syllable. Yeah. But yeah, Patrick Daugherty. And I started talking before you even introduced me.
That's okay. We got to see each other over Expo weekend, and we're happy to have you here because there is a lot to talk about. Quickly, before we begin though, reminder, the 4for4 Pro subscription is available to everyone. Only $39. It would be more if it were up to me. Corporate instead batted me away and said, make it cheap for everyone. And if you use the promo code Daigle10, you will get 10% off that $39, not monthly, literally for the entire year, to see all of Paulson's rankings and projection changes, as well as everything, literally everything, my team previews, my updates, Paulson's rankings log changes, our sleepers on the site, everything for that price locked in. But before we begin, boys, let's get to the big news of the week, because the Jets signed Dalvin Cook finally off the streets for $7 million guaranteed 1-year deal. Cook is not yet reported to camp with this chronic shoulder injury that has haunted him after shoulder offseason surgery for his entire time with the Vikings. But a 7-year deal still makes him a top 10 back and cap hit this season. Pat, more importantly, how are you handling the Breece Hall ADP change now that we expect him to be in a timeshare at least to start the year?
I was off Breece before in our draft guide. I wrote him up as like our overvalued player because I just couldn't. It felt so aspirational, the entire Breece Hall case, because we saw what happened last year with J.K. Dobbins. It's not a one-to-one comparison. But, a needed reminder maybe that these recoveries are not always so seamless. And then with the Jets all offseason, like just kind of making it clear they were going to add competition. I was very wary, very leery. And I buy the arguments that Dalvin Cook is if not washed, close to wash. That's borne out in all the efficiency metrics, even the counting stats. The boomer counting stats, not as efficient as he used to be. But this is like as close to an all-in team as you're ever going to see. They're not going to wait around for Breece Hall to get healthy. I think in best ball, like we're just, some of the smartest voices in our industry now are kind of like best ball focused. And Patrick Crane has talked about, how it doesn't matter with Breece because in the second half of the season, that's what you're really drafting him for. But
absolutely.
In redraft, though, it does matter. The season is so short. For Breece to help you in the playoffs, you have to make the playoffs. And there's no guarantee that he's just going to come back and like start taking like a lion's share of what is going to be a committee. And so before I thought Breece was way too high. There is a chance, as always happens with these things, there's an overcorrection and he becomes like way too low, maybe falls out like the top 24 at running back. That probably won't happen, but I would need a steep discount to be interested in Breece Hall because a guy was already off before. Let's just say that this hasn't brought me any closer to him.
And that's what makes it a fun discussion, Paulson, is because both sides have an argument. We usually just follow the money, and the money suggests that this will be a committee now. But also a second-year back, Breece Hall, we know per the Twitter therapist, the fantasy therapist, as they like to be called, throughout the offseason, they have said that players off of a torn ACL the next year, usually the ones that bounce back historically, have been elite athletes that catch passes. And Breece Hall not only led every running back last year with 21 air yards per game and a 12.5% target share himself, but also he's a 90th percentile athlete. He's the kind of player we want to target if the ADP dips. So how are you handling it in redraft leagues?
Well, the funny thing is here is we're all worried about Breece Hall's health, and he's back at practice. I don't think he's in team drills yet, but he's back at practice. Meanwhile, Dalvin Cook and his bulky shoulder,
perfect.
Which we've been worried about this shoulder for a number of years now, and one hit and he could be done for 6
They pop that thing back in 3 or 4 times a year. It's fine.
Yeah, it's no big deal, I guess. But Hall's back. We'll see how quickly they ramp him up. I think this. People are probably overreacting a little bit. I'm probably guilty of as well. Like thinking of Dalvin Cook 2 or 3 years ago joining this team, and like what does that mean? But it does seem like the beat writers are saying this is still Breece Hall's backfield when healthy. And if he were still on PUP for another week or two, then I would definitely start getting worried about week 1. But the fact that he's back at practice says they're going to get him back into team drills next week. It sounds like he's more healthy than Cook is. So I, moved him down to 20, and I moved him back up to 16 or 17 right now in half PPR, because I think he does have that talent, and he does have what you mentioned, John, which was the physical tools to recover from this ACL injury quickly. These are the guys, these kind of freaky guys that are coming, like Adrian Peterson. I'm not saying he's in Adrian Peterson's category, but these are the guys that you do target, young athletic players coming off these ACLs. And he got injured a little bit before Javonte Williams as well, which made me a little bit more bullish on him heading to the offseason as well.
My DMs have been hammered, not with women, unfortunately, but with people trying to figure out if Breece Hall is an ideal target at the beginning of the 5th round. Because what's happening right now with everyone who's drafted thus far is they can start from one of those top 5 picks with a Christian McCaffrey or Austin Eckler, or a top wide receiver, Jamar Chase, then go a Jalen Hurts, Chris Olave, and eventually it just comes back to them with 2 wide receivers, maybe even 3 and an elite quarterback. And Breece Hall sitting there at the beginning of the 5th round. Pat, is that a place where you would feel comfortable taking him even in an anchor RB build?
No, I'm too much of a boomer. I'm too risk averse. I'm just one of those guys where, like, I'll let someone else bet on the recovery, and it would be one thing if we were only betting on the health. Like that is something where, like, okay, whatever, as long as this guy's healthy, there's no one else in this backfield. There's a $7 million back in this backfield now, like you said, signed by the team's new general manager, Aaron Rodgers, who seems to really, really, really like Dalvin Cook after playing against him for 40 years or whatever. And the fact that now there's a second obstacle in his way. So I would have been leery with just the health. The fact that it's now the health and that there is now competition, maybe he'll be washed or maybe he'll be rejuvenated a little bit, Dalvin Cook, this year. I mean, who the heck really knows? I mean, that he's probably not going to be rejuvenated. But he's basically on my do not draft board, which shouldn't exist because everyone should be draftable at the right ADP. But you will just not find me taking any Breece Hall shares in my home leagues and my redrafts.
And just to give everyone an example, Paulson, who are the names that you still have just ahead of Breece Hall and just behind him?
Well, I'm looking at it right now. Ramondre Stevenson ahead of him, Joe Mixon, Miles Sanders. But Miles Sanders is supposedly going to miss the whole preseason. I really like him in this bell cow role in Carolina, but the fact that he's already dinged up and this is a history of injury history of Miles Sanders previous years. It's tough. I have Alexander Madison ahead of him, Aaron Jones, of course. I love Aaron Jones. So behind him right now, Najee Harris with the whole Jaylen Warren, possibly digging into his backfield a little bit. Kenneth Walker, Cam Akers. Cam Akers is interesting though, given all those touches he saw late last year. He looked pretty good. And Travis Etienne behind him.
And that's another thing, Pat, when people try to, for Breece Hall, for me, moving him down the rankings just slightly, it was more about everyone else behind him and just saying, I can't put that guy ahead of Breece Hall. Like Travis Etienne is in a 3-headed committee. Breece Hall is only 2-headed.
Maybe.
Why would I want to put Etienne ahead of him?
Yeah, Etienne, Etienne, I'm just like, I just immediately abandoned the argument I made for Breece Hall. I'm just betting on talent. I would be willing to bet on the Breece Hall talent if it wasn't ACL recovered. Travis Etienne, I'm still comfortable betting on the talent. And maybe last year is his ceiling, but I also think it's close to his floor for Etienne, which is why maybe he's just going to be like a narrow range player, kind of like a Nick Chubb that's more pass catching based than between the tackles based, but like a Nick Chubb player where it's like a really narrow range every year, but he hits that range every year. That's kind of how Travis Etienne feels to me.
When you're talking about Travis Etienne, you got to keep Nick Chubb's name out of your mouth.
No, very different runners. But I'm saying the same kind of fantasy like range of distributions.
Gotcha.
It's a narrow range of distribution for Travis Etienne, and maybe we wish the ceiling would be higher, the ceiling cap by the touch competition. But I think the floor is so high with Travis Etienne.
And if you are thinking Dalvin Cook is an RB2 or 3 to pad for the first month of the season, while Breece Hall is very clearly brought along slowly, Just remember, the Jets opened the year against the Bills, Cowboys, Patriots, Chiefs, Broncos in Denver, and the Eagles. I don't know how many situations are going to be friendly for Dalvin Cook in that 6-game stretch.
Man, that is pretty bad. I was waiting for the one, Texans, and it did not come.
I was actually watching the Hard Knocks last night with my wife. We're watching, and we always watch it every year. And I did tell her, I think that I'm rooting against the Jets the most. I think I'd rather see the Vikings or the Bears win a Super Bowl than the Jets this year.
The other big ADP adjustment from this weekend is Ezekiel Elliot landing for roughly $6 million with the Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson was previously going around the 2nd or 3rd round turn. Pat, how are you viewing Stevenson in redraft leagues now?
I'm viewing way less of a hit for Ramondre Stevenson. And to me, it doesn't really change anything for Ramondre Stevenson, except for there were probably people thinking maybe there's one more step for Ramondre Stevenson to take. He was already a low-end RB1 last year, but maybe he can ascend to like the top 5 or 6 if they don't add any touch competition, which he was some weeks last year, top 5 or 6. I think the only thing that's changed is that Zeke kind of removes like that another gear possibility. But I think low-end RB1 is still a pretty reasonable bet for Ramondre Stevenson. And a classic guy who already used to operating at a committee. That would kind of went wonky at times last year where Damian Harris's injury issues meant it really wasn't a committee a lot of weeks. But I think the only thing that really changes for Ramondre is that it removes the possibility of him ascending another level. But I think that he can remain at that level we saw for almost all of 2022. And I'm still fine with him as a meat and potatoes guy. On like the 2-3 turn. And to someone, you're not going to get that extra gear, but you're going to get, I think, the 2022 gear.
I went to change my personal rankings, Paulson, and I saw Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs right behind Ramondre, and I thought, I can't draft him behind those guys. I still want Stevenson over those players giving their own warts. So what are your thoughts with Stevenson now?
So you must have Stevenson at like 8 then, right?
9
Something
overall,
like
yeah.
9 overall, okay. So, yeah, I mean, he's a really talented player, 4th in yards after contact per attempt, 2nd in broken tackles per attempt per Pro Football Reference. And that was as a rookie last year. He was good again in those metrics. I think the one concern here is not that Ezekiel Elliott is a better running back, is going to steal a lot of carries or touches from Ramondre. It's that he might steal goal line touches.
Definitely.
TJ Hernandez had a funny tweet. He's like, I'm not worried about this because the Patriots are unlikely to be in goal-to-goal situations this year. So I thought that was pretty funny. But no, I moved him down a little bit. I moved him back up a little bit. I just think that Elliott is probably just going to take over all those other touches that those other running backs were going to get in that backfield, and Stevenson's role is going to be pretty much unchanged. I do think there is a chance that, maybe Elliott's getting half those goal line carries, and that does ding Stevenson a little bit, but not a whole lot. Given the landscape, this RB2 landscape, I think he's still a low end RB1.
Only James Conner had a higher rate of first down on 3rd and 4th down carries than Ezekiel Elliott last year. He still moves the chains. It's why the Patriots signed him. But the angle I've been taking, Pat, is that I don't know how often Elliott can be on the field for this team this year, because everyone looks at their defense last season, 3rd in EPA overall, but the metrics lie to you, because this team in 8 wins, all they did was pad those stats for 10.7 points per game against rookies and backup quarterbacks. 8-0 in that situation. In the other games, they allowed a league-high 29 points per game against Tua, Lamar, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, Kirk Cousins, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, and Derek Carr. Average to above-average quarterbacks. And all they did was add a first-round cornerback. So I think the defense is yet again going to sneakily be very bad, and thus there is no situation for Zeke to be on the field over Ramondre.
Yeah, those 2 Zach Wilson starts swapped out for 2 Aaron Rodgers
helps your
starts.
Defense a lot.
Yeah, it is. I think the Patriots defense will probably normalize like a little bit, both in terms of like they're not going to have as many people to feast on, but then against the good offenses, they're not going to be quite as bad as they were last year. Because it was one of the most shocking splits of the entire 2022 season. Like there was kind of like no refuting it. It was like, yep, that's undeniable. They were absolutely horrific against good teams. And like the 85 Bears against everybody, which you would expect from Bill Belichick to devour Zach Wilson's alive. But and also, though, I think it'll just normalize a little bit. It's going to be such a more rationally sequenced offense. Or I think the floor of the offense definitely comes up. Maybe the ceiling doesn't really come up even with Mac Jones, but just the floor of the offense they're gonna have like an actual offensive coordinator, an actual play sequencing now. So that should help. And Zeke though he's gonna be the guy at the goal line. There's just no denying that.
An RB 5 or 6, in my opinion, Paulson, but you need him to fall forward for a couple touchdowns for him to actually be flexible.
Yeah, he has a little bit of attrition upside if there's an injury to Stevenson. I think he's probably going to get the lion's share of the touches if there's an injury there. But yeah, I've got him as an RB4 right now.
Underdog Pick'em went live in Colorado over the weekend as well, so you can sign up there today. Now, with those projection changings out of the way, it's time to get to our sleepers. Now, I created one caveat for y'all, and that is 14th round on, actual sleepers. You can't show up and say Christian Watson's a sleeper in the 5th round. And I've heard the rule I made has already been broken. So, Pat, let's start with you. Go ahead and lead us off with your first sleeper you want everyone to draft in redraft leagues.
I'm not breaking the rule. I think my guy is 14th or beyond, but he's not going to sound like a sleeper to your savvy audience. And I also give the same disclaimer, which I'm sure you guys probably agree with, is like sleepers just don't really exist anymore, do they? And at the Expo, you can follow up on that stuff, but John, at the Expo, I talked about the example of Arian Foster. It was 2009, 2010. The year he's an undrafted rookie. Like everyone in the industry knew, like Arian Foster shouldn't have been an undrafted player, was going to lead the Texans backfield, was basically going to blow up. But like the general public just didn't know because the fantasy content wasn't as good. The content has gotten so much better. The average drafter is so much better informed that like sleepers as we knew it when we first started in fantasy don't really exist anymore. So it is like these guys with like 0-point floors basically, and the ceiling's much harder to find in the sleepers. So it is sleepers like a strange concept now, which is kind of why I went with Dark Horse for this article. But you go, John.
Which is also why the takeaway for me this early on, knowing that everyone still has to draft, the 2 last weekends of August and the first weekend of September have now become the biggest fantasy football weekend. So the drafts have also been pushed down. Thus, ADP hasn't corrected or adjusted for itself yet. But what's happened as well, because everyone's more astute, is that rounds 4 through 8 have become fadeable players in a dead zone, and that everyone is a high floor, no ceiling option. Like Miles Sanders, high floor, no ceiling. Don't mind taking him like in an underdog draft when he falls to pick 70 and beyond. But yeah, that's what really what's happened now. It's become more obvious for players that don't have ceiling to fade with your top 5 draft pick capital, as opposed to sleepers in the later rounds.
So for my first sleeper, can Tank Dell still count?
You can count him.
To your audience, he doesn't sound like a sleeper. He is going after the 14th round, and he was the classic guy. Like I wish, maybe a Tank could have had a little worse like preseason debut. Instead, he just continued with the drum beat, which started before the draft apparently when CJ Stroud told the Texans they got to get him. They went and got him. We all know about like the explosive college resume, the amazing compiling, blows up spring practices, was blowing up training camp practices. Does exceptionally well in the preseason debut. After the game, the new coach is calling him explosive playmaker. All sorts of caveats. Rookie quarterback. Robert Woods is still there. We really have no idea what the Texans receiver corps is going to look like. Like John Mechie could be the number 1 receiver after not even playing last year. Or it could be Nico Collins. Or it could be Tank Dell. Or it could be by default, like de facto, Dalton Schultz could be the number 1 receiver. This Tank Dell is a guy who has basically not given me a reason yet to start to doubt the hype. And it's kind of annoying when everyone starts getting in on a player, because now Tank Dell is on everyone's radar who's paying attention to this kind of stuff. But I think he deserves to be there. And still going in the 14th round, that's a place where I'm very comfortable taking a shot on Tank Dell. Again, where there's so many targets for the taking. We fall in this trap all the time with rookies. Like, the team's going to have no choice but to target this guy. And then we find out, they very much do have a choice. And they just target some like Olamide Zacchaeus or something like that, but have not found a reason to be out on Tank Dell yet. And the ADP is still reasonable to me. I love taking my Tank Dell flyers.
Your thoughts on Dell, Paulson?
Yeah, I mean, this passing attack, this wide receiver room is wide open. I think Dalton Schultz does have a chance to lead the team in targets, but I think Tank Dell could as well, as a low ADOT type player, low ADOT player. Nico Collins has been the player that I've been interested in because he's got some experience, and he was pretty solid last year, 40, 50 yards per game. And, losing Brandon Cooks, I thought he, certainly in best ball, I think he's got more upside than Dell on a weekly basis. But Dell, it's just been this steady drumbeat of positive news about him, and quarterbacks like to throw to players that can get open, and it sounds like he can get open. I think CJ Stroud has some upside as a passer. I was over at the Reception Perception site, and we've got some interesting metrics there about the class coming out, and Stroud is actually leading in most of those advanced metrics. So excuse me, but I think there's some upside there with him. So there might be a little bit of upside with his passing attack, especially if the offense is bad and they're just going to have to throw the ball a lot more than they'd like to, not hand the ball to Dameon Pierce, but have to throw it to all these receivers.
I still like Nico, of course, whose ADP is many, many rounds higher, given that his target per route run rate jumped from 17.5% with Brandon Cooks on the field last year to 24% with Cooks off of it. Also, remember, the Texans quarterbacks were dead last season in catchable pass rate on throws 10-plus yards downfield, and CJ Stroud led the nation in throws in completion rate 10-plus yards downfield. So I think we're getting more accurate and better deep shots for Nico Collins for sure. Having said that, Pat, it was admittedly sexy whenever Tank Dell is targeted on 8 of his 19 routes in the first preseason game. I don't know how they carve out a role for him, because I still think as a top 12 run blocking receiver at Pro Football Focus anyways, and Robert Woods, and Nico being the archetype of a receiver they can't take off the field because none of the other guys have the size speed combo. I don't know how they get Dell targets in a limited offense, but he at least is very different and very shifty from the other receivers there.
People kept pointing out to me, by the way, that it was Davis Mills he was cooking with over the weekend and not CJ Stroud, and that so we had to temper our expectations a little bit. But Bob Woods is he's the looming specter. I'm hoping we get a surprise Bob Woods retirement announcement or something like August 30th. That would do my Dell shares a solid.
Paulson, your first sleeper.
Yeah, let's go to tight end. We talked about Dalton Schultz. He left the Cowboys, and there's this guy called Jake Ferguson who's and this is the 20th round ADP here. So, and we talk about sleepers. I just go back to I have a friend. I talk about my fireman friend, and he starts to pay attention in the mid-August, and he doesn't know any of these guys. So I think it's worthwhile discussion for people that are tuning in now to get up to speed. But Jake Ferguson, had a good preseason game, 3 for 3 targets, 4.75 yards per route run, thanks to Hayden Winks for those stats. He was 9th amongst tight ends with at least 20 targets last year in yards per route run, 1.66. They did draft Luke Shoemaker in the second round, but he's been sidelined with a foot injury, so he's behind the 8 ball, and Ferguson, meanwhile, is balling. So I think, that plus what George Kittle said about him, which was interesting. I think it was Matt Harmon who asked him who's next at the position, and he was one of 3. Jake Ferguson was one of 3 players, along with Sam Laporta and Daniel Bellinger, who were up-and-coming tight ends at the position. So, getting that endorsement from Kittle, going to be playing starter snaps with a good quarterback, Dak Prescott. The only concern here, I think, is, Mike McCarthy trying to make this more run-oriented team, but I think they're going to throw the tight end, and, he's a great pick there as a tight end too. Especially if you're worried about your tight end position at all. If you go late tight end and want to have a little bit of upside, this is a situation where you might take a second tight end, Jake Ferguson.
Yeah, well, I say Ferguson too. I like that. So Shoemaker, I was like, wow, that's concerning when they drafted tight end in the second round. But the media and the coaching staff has been pretty consistent since the spring that Jake Ferguson is going to be the starting tight end. And there is a targets need in Dallas. I mean, they added Brandon Cooks, but still a fairly narrow. It's not the most narrow target tree, especially if Michael Gallup bounces back. But there are targets for the taking, and I just like that. Yeah, they have not wavered that it's going to be Jake Ferguson. And maybe it won't be Jake Ferguson all year if Shoemaker, I can never pronounce this guy's name, starts to come on and show something early in the season. But they have not wavered then that it's going to be Jake Ferguson. Even if it's more run heavy, it's still Dak Prescott. I mean, this guy's going to be throwing the ball at least 35 times a game. And he's going in the true nowheresville of tight end. It's Luke Musgrave, it's Tyler Conklin, it's Dawson Knox, and just the history of the Cowboys offense under Dak Prescott, really the history of offense under Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy's trying to talk about running, but we could see you in Green Bay, Mike McCarthy, and it really wasn't always your thing. I think there could be a lot of targets there for Jake Ferguson, not tight end one level targets, of course, but enough targets to make him a viable streamer.
Ferguson made 2 starts for Dalton Schultz last year and was a top 8 tight end in one of those. Also, if you include his 3 targets from Cooper Rush in the first preseason game, going back to last year, his 22.7% target per route run rate would have finished 7th among all tight ends last season. I think he is a starter who can earn targets and only has a day 2 tight end whose name we can't pronounce in his way. Thus, I think he's an amazing last round option. I as well am all in on Jake Ferguson.
Are you still a Cowboys fan, by the way, Daigle?
That fanhood died like a decade ago. Whenever you start working this job, you just lose everything and you want players to get paid.
That happened to me with the Rams.
I actually can't believe Paulson still has love. I appreciate it because my heart died long ago.
Some people keep the love. Mike Clay he gets like a new Eagles tattoo on his chest every year. He won't admit it, but yeah, some people keep the love.
My sleeper I want to start with is someone high-stakes players have caught on to. I've seen his ADP now go to the 12th round. But in home leagues, no one is going to know who Marvin Mims is. And it's a player I want to leave every redraft league with, especially after Tim Patrick's unfortunate Achilles injury, now opening the path for Mims to play in 3 wide sets. Mims had an odd career under Lincoln Riley, who is an offensive guru, but like Arthur Smith, does not care about your college fantasy team. He uses players where they are best capable in the field, which is also why Jordan Addison was removed from the slot last season with USC and instead put more on the boundary where he didn't have as much success. But Mims, quietly, 2nd in yards per route run from his career among this class in Power 5 receivers, only behind Jackson Smith-Njigba, who everyone, of course, is fawning over. Mims also, 95% of his career touchdowns in college occurred on targets 20 yards deep. He is basically little Christian Watson, and no one knows it. Also remember, Sean Payton, his very first pick of the Broncos tenure was in fact Marvin Mims. So now with this pathway open, with Cortland Sutton being dangled this offseason, with Jerry Jeudy being tried to trade for a first-round pick, and of course, no one bought on it, I really do think there's a path here for Mims to explode as a flex or wide receiver 3 in home leagues, and I want him, Pat, everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, you made all the most important points, the most important of which being he's just the only guy taken by this new coaching staff, a coaching staff we know that is obsessed with its guys. The fact that it went out and acquired Adam Troutman, signed guys like Tony Jones, bringing in like all the Sean Payton system knowers. They think Marvin Mims is a Sean Payton system knower, the one guy they were able to bring. And like you said, too, after they tried to get rid of everyone else. And like the one guy that can maybe really like earn their favor with like hard-nosed type play, Tim Patrick, now out for the year. Not that Sean Payton's out on Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, but we just know he's in on Marvin Mims. And he seems like the classic archetype in fantasy, like the kind of wide receiver 4 who has a 0-point floor, but he's the kind of guy who can like flip a matchup on 2 catches. Because if he has 2 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown, the kind of guy where maybe you can play matchups with, like this seems like a week where Marvin Mims might be able to get a big play. And maybe he won't and will get you a 0. He just feels like that guy that you want to have on your bench. And when you need to use him, has the kind of upside to flip a matchup.
Any thoughts, Paulson?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those funny deals is when you get the wide receiver 3 with some talent. If you draft him late, you have injury upside with 2 different players. So if Jeudy goes down or if Sutton goes down, you doubled your attrition upside, and now you have a wide receiver 2 or maybe even the wide receiver 1 in an offense with Russell Wilson and Sean Payton running things. So I think I do like drafting these third receivers late who have that talent that will potentially be able to explode if there's an injury ahead of them.
Pat, your second sleeper for everyone.
Man, I've really been dithering on which one to say. There's a lot up here. I'm going to go with Cedric Tillman, which I kind of don't want to say.
We're really getting to sleepers now.
I know,
okay.
Because Cedric Tillman, as we know, could be to nowheresville this year. Yeah. He could like barely get any targets. But yeah, and Paulson mentioned earlier, like player comments. I couldn't help but notice when Randy Moss was like, yeah, this guy is one of the best receiver prospects I've ever seen in my life. He apparently said that about Cedric Tillman. And just Donovan Peoples-Jones, people don't really realize, I mean, got close to like 900 yards last year, played pretty well with Deshaun Watson, but he's also had 3 years where DPJ kind of looks like a hard ceiling player. Pretty good chance last year was maybe DPJ's career year. And just Cedric Tillman is the kind of guy that Deshaun Watson, I think, just could really have success with down the field. Just such a high ceiling player, 0 cost, doesn't have an ADP in home leagues. And this is a guy I love as a late round flyer. And again, maybe he's like the first guy you cut, but another guy who's kind of had a drumbeat summer, kind of had a drumbeat camp where he's impressed the coaches, he's impressed the players, he's impressed the Browns media. And again, it could be a healthy scratch week 1, but I just feel like there's so much upside at a non-existent ADP that I find myself drafting Cedric Tillman with one of my final 2 picks in basically every draft I do.
The point I always make, Paulson, is that Tillman's Tennessee teammate, Jalen Hyatt, picked just 1 spot by the Giants in the NFL draft in the 3rd round before Tillman came off the board to Cleveland. Jalen Hyatt had 500 yards and 4 touchdowns total through his first 2 seasons because Cedric Tillman was the better player there. And yes, Hyatt won the Biletnikoff Award for being the nation's best receiver last year, but only because Tillman yet again opened the year with 6 catches for 83 yards and 9 catches for 160 yards and a touchdown, and then suffered a season-ending ankle injury, getting out of the way for Hyatt to explode. Tillman also was a 21-year-old breakout, 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns in the NFL of college, the SEC. So I do believe Tillman can emerge in 3 wide sets with Deshaun Watson.
I have him at, as wide receiver 4 on the depth chart. I'm skeptical, given the buzz out of camp with Peoples-Jones. He's apparently been locked into 2 receiver sets with Amari Cooper. They're working on Elijah Moore as the 3rd receiver, and handing him screens and all these jet sweeps and all these things. So I think Tillman is. I mean, your points are valid. I just think Tillman is going to need an injury to Amari Cooper or Peoples-Jones or more to get on the field. But again, now you've got 3 players. Any one of them could go down, and now you have a pretty talented player entering the starting lineup with Deshaun Watson, who a lot of folks think that he's going to bounce back this year.
Yeah, Paulson, you are right about DPJ also having a good camp, but when I hear like screens and jet sweeps for Elijah Moore, like to me that sounds like good news. Like, oh, they don't know how to get this guy the ball. So Cedric Tillman can maybe, I don't know, that'd be a pretty big 3 receiver set, but Elijah Moore's probably going to be in there. But I just love Ced as one of the truly free flyers. Again, we're talking true sleepers here, guys.
DPJ also in the final year of his contract, so you can see him kind of moving out of the way. And remember, with Deshaun Watson under center for that last month and a half stretch, the Browns upped their pass rate from 11 personnel, 3 wide sets, to 76%, top 10 in the NFL. So we do think there's more room for 3 wide sets in this offense. So I can certainly see it happening, especially with deeper benches, and we're holding on to rookie wide receivers for second half breakouts.
You said it better than me.
Paulson, your next guy.
Yeah, I'm waffling here who I want to talk about next, just to make sure we get all of them in before we break. But let's talk about Kenneth Gainwell situation in Philly. I mean, he's going 1309, so this is the cheating. But I wanted to talk about it because I wanted to get your guys' take on this whole situation with Rashad Penny, DeAndre Swift playing in this first preseason game. Nick Sirianni came out after and said, well, it was just their turn, blah, blah, blah. But then he also said that the starters rested because we have joint practices on Monday. So the indication was that all the starters rested for Philly, and that indicates that maybe Gainwell's ahead of these guys. I dug up 4 different beat writers who some of them I hadn't heard of before, but they've been at camp. I got flamed because I quoted Elliot Shore Parks or whatever his name is, and he's just, I guess, not the greatest.
Got to be careful there.
He's uncorked some takes in the past. A lot of times not about football.
But I found 3 others, and they were all saying that Gainwell's getting the most touches. He's looked the best, and that he's likely to be the starter. Now, this is going to be a committee. I think we know that. They didn't sign Rashad Penny and trade for DeAndre Swift just to give Gainwell 400 touches or something. But if Gainwell is the lead back, it's possible that we could see a Miles Sanders type season emerge. But Sanders saw 279 touches last year. I think that's steep for any running back to expect that out of this backfield. But at the cost of a 13th rounder, he's the 3rd Eagles running back going off the board. Should we be getting some Gainwell on our rosters at this point, given all these tea leaves that we're reading?
I mean, I think absolutely. He's the one true system knower. We know how important that is. We know all about the horrible injury histories for both Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift, especially Rashad Penny. And I think even if the Eagles coaching staff intention is to make Kenneth Gainwell the number 3 running back, that they just might not be able to help themselves. They could not stop giving this guy important snaps down the stretch last season. They really, really like Kenneth Gainwell. So the indications remaining this summer, they still really like Kenneth Gainwell. And it's really hard to be trying to break in like 2 new veteran backs for like big touch shares. And like that's kind of unwieldy. I could just see it just being easier for them to like, whatever, just keep Kenny out there. Like we'll try to bring Penny and Swift along, and then just kind of never really happens. And like you said, the problem is it's going to be not just a committee, but probably a 3-back committee. But there's just been indicator lights all summer that he could be the leader of a 3-man committee, Kenneth Gainwell. And they've been blinking increasingly red as training camp has progressed.
We just need to use more context when talking about Philadelphia's backfield. And all the news has lacked that. It's all relative. Like the Eagles RB1 is still not getting 300+ touches. The reason we draft Gainwell 9-10 rounds later in home leagues over DeAndre Swift is because we're still playing a game. We're playing a game of fantasy football. And the game is allowing us to take a ambiguous committee back 10 rounds later than the guy perceived as a starter. That's not how you play the game. Invest that kind of capital in DeAndre Swift. Not only that, but remember, DeAndre Swift, the former number 35 overall pick in a draft, was traded for a 4th-round pick because the Eagles can get that pick back if he doesn't re-sign there. It was strictly an organizational move. Maybe they really do like Swift, but there's so much more behind the scenes going on in that they can just get they can basically get Swift for nothing, sprinkle him in, and then he walks, they get the pick back. It's okay. So I have severe doubts in DeAndre Swift and think just citing his target share, like 8th most targets among running backs last year, I think highlighting that data for everyone is not using it correctly. It's not providing all the context. So I take Gainwell even as an RB2 or 3 if I don't have many running backs to that point in drafts in the later rounds every time.
I just wanted to add, Pat alluded to it, the increased touch and snap shares for Gainwell down the stretch. I mean, in the playoffs, he saw 37%, 42%, and then 51% of the snaps. That 51% was in the Super Bowl. He outtouched Miles Sanders 11-7 in that Super Bowl, 51% to 35% in terms of snaps. So it was trending this way, and they let Sanders walk. And, you know, they obviously like Gainwell. Now they did add competition. I do think Rashad Penny, certainly from a metric standpoint, advanced stats metric standpoint, he's outstanding. And if he's healthy, he could crush in this offense. I think DeAndre Swift is explosive, good pass catcher, can run the ball as well. But just these, like you said, these indicator lights, kind of pointing to Gainwell as the 3rd back off the board in this backfield as maybe perhaps the starter.
And one final thing on Penny. This one's more like anecdotal or gut, but as we know, Penny in Seattle, he seemed to be like a rhythm player where he didn't really start impressing people till he was getting 15 or 20 carries. That's when like Rashad Penny kind of became like this poor man's Adrian Peterson. And it's just hard to see him, getting the level of work that it would require to like really impress this coaching staff on Sundays. And Penny too. So we're worried about Swift, but I'm as worried about Penny as I am about Swift, where he's just not going to see the kind of workloads he needs to thrive and then to maybe like consolidate his touch share.
But if you asked me which one leads in fantasy points, it's probably still Penny in 8 games played.
Yeah, that is a really, really, really good point.
Keeping on the theme of ambiguous backfields and trying to not spend capital there, I really think the worst mistake people can make in drafts is taking Alexander Mattison with a top 60 pick. We continue extrapolating the touches from his 6 starts without Dalvin Cook from a completely different coaching staff. Not only that, per our friends at Sports Info Solutions, out of every back with 100+ carries the last 2 years, Alexander Mattison ranks last in yards per carry against light man boxes. 5 defenders or fewer in the box. He's been bad. And so I very much worry about this ambiguous situation in the offense and then people taking Mattison with a top 60 pick. Thus, we instead go to Ty Chandler, who is an 85th percentile athlete who comps to Jamal Charles and Tevin Coleman. Also got rave reviews in the first preseason game since he picked up pass blocks so well too. He's the kind of player I want to bet on, especially in this last round, hoping that he carves out a role or just outperforms Mattison altogether. So it's a bet against an ambiguous situation that people are using high capital on, Pat.
Yeah, Mattison, the one thing I always come back to, like he was playing behind almost an all-pro level back for the majority of his rookie contract, but to go through an entire rookie contract and not even reach 500 career touches when you stayed healthy, like he just never, he just never ever forced their hand to make it like a true committee and earn a true 1B role. They weren't like super aggressive about re-signing him. They did re-sign him, but he had 4 years, an entire rookie contract to force a bigger role. And he just never did. He just seems like a replacement level player. And maybe they're fine with him leading a backfield for a year, like leading a committee for a year. I just think that is their intention with Alexander Mattison, though, is to let him like kind of lead a committee. And yeah, seriously, maybe be like a Chase Edmonds player where we used to these plug and play starts where he got like 20 to 25 touches, where I could see him much, much more being in like the 12 to 15 touch range on a weekly basis. And an offense, the two that I think is going to be like even more pass heavy than it was last year. I'm part of the brigade staying all the way off Alexander Mattison.
And Paulson, if he gets the touches, that's when it gets thrown back and pat in my face, right? Like if he gets the touches, he's still going to be there as a high-end RB2, I guess. But the point is to bet against it because we don't try to fit players like Chase Edmonds in those kind of buckets and drafts. That's what led people to drafting Edmonds over Jalen Hurts in the 6th round last year.
Well, I tend to disagree. I think Mattison is kind of underrated at this point. It's funny because it's like we have to draft him last year because he is a primetime handcuff. If Dalvin Cook gets injured, you got RB1 numbers whenever Mattison plays, and he delivered RB1 numbers. Now, some of those defenses he played against weren't great, but he still did it. In the games where he's had at least 10 carries, he's averaged 18 touches for 88 yards, 0.57 touchdowns. Those 13 half PPR points are about what Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones scored as low-end RB1s last year. And if his ADP was in the 4th round or 3rd round or something, then I could understand a lot of caution. But I think 5th round, 6th round, which is where he's going, I'm looking at his ADP, 58, 37, 66, 59, 73, 87, 46 going across the different sites. Depending on where you're drafting, you might be able to get him 6th, 7th round. I think that's extremely fair value. They've been talking about him as 3-down back, and they've been resting him. And he was, you said he was bad, but he had the number 14 rushing grade at PFF last year. So I don't know how bad he is. I
feel like we just got schooled, John Daigle. Sorry. But no, he's bad.
Pat, your final sleeper for everyone. I don't know how much more we can nap since you already went Cedric Tillman, but please go to sleep.
Well, real quick, this guy's not a sleeper. It's his 13th round, but I do think there's a non-0% chance Alec Pierce becomes the Colts' #1 receiver this year.
I love Alec Pierce
because he's a better fit for the kind of offense they probably have to play with Anthony Richardson. But I think I will go even more to sleep. This is like almost too ridiculous, but Michael Wilson with the Cardinals, who we talk about with Marvin Mims, the one player the Broncos coaching staff got to draft. The one player this new Cardinals brain trust got to draft in the receiver core is Michael Wilson. They're apparently transitioning. They want like the Cliff army of 5'8" slot receivers out. They want a bigger receiver core. He is the big receiver. He's been having a really strong training camp, apparently. Major quarterback problems, question marks, between Colt McCoy and Clayton Tune probably to begin the season, and maybe even Kyler Murray, of a knee hobbled. It's a phrase I stole from Evan Silva, by the way. If a knee hobbled Kyler Murray comes back and is not looking great in a bad offense, he could have bad quarterback play all year in Michael Wilson. But 3rd round pick, the one guy brought in by the new regime, having a really good camp, apparently fits the new offense they're going to run. And it's getting basically no buzz whatsoever in fantasy circle, which is understandable since this is a horrible offense. But Michael Wilson's another guy, probably more in 14-team leagues, but near the end of these deep drafts, I am drafting Michael Wilson.
In these $2,000 high stakes 20-round leagues, Paulson, I keep telling all my partners we are drafting Michael Wilson.
Hell yeah.
We like players who perform well early on in their career in college. And he was actually a 19-year-old breakout, 670 yards, 5 touchdowns with Stanford, then suffered a Jones fracture in 2020. And from that point forward, missed more games, 16 absences, that he stayed healthy for, 14. But a 90th percentile athlete, as Pat mentioned, standing head and shoulders above the rest of their receivers.
Quite literally.
In an ambiguous offense from Colt McCoy and a new coaching staff, and locked in, cemented in 2 wide sets based on every report, glowing reports, by the way, out of camp. So I, too, love Michael Wilson as a sleeper this year.
I would just mention Rondale Moore. Had 8+ targets in 5 of his 7 healthy games.
That was not a real offense, John Paul.
It was a
7,
slot
6,
receiver
7,
offense.
8, 9. Well, yeah. I mean, what is this offense going to be? What is this team going to be?
No clue. And I will say, sorry, John, it's going to be Clayton Tune, by the way, because Colt McCoy, he's at the stage of his career where when he plays, he gets hurt. He will get hurt in week 1, and it's going to be Clayton Tune after that.
Well, what about Kyler Murray? Is he not going to play?
Not in week 1. I don't believe so.
This offense is weirdly sneaky upside if you look at it if you really cross your eyes and you can envision
cross them 4 times.
Cross them 4 and maybe step back, take your glasses off. Because if Kyler Murray comes back in September and they're just getting killed, how many pass attempts is he going to have? He's pretty good. So I think there's some upside here, even with both of our sleeper picks there.
It's not a fade Marquise Brown take. It is this is no longer a horizontal slot receiver offense. Rondale Moore, of course, who I love as a player, but even in the team's first preseason game, only played in 3 wide sets from the slot. It's an entirely different offense. Thus, I think we can use that burner pick in redraft leagues that usually just end up cutting after week 1. I think we can use it on a player in the last round like Michael Wilson.
Yeah, Cardinals running a real offense will be interesting to see.
All right, Paulson, your last sleeper.
I'm going to go with Sam Howell. We've talked about him on the podcast before.
I'm glad you're doing it.
If you go late round quarterback and you maybe target a Geno Smith or an Anthony Richardson or something, and you want to just have a little bit more upside on that bench, maybe be able to play the committee, play the matchups a little bit. I think Sam Howell has a lot of upside. He also has a lot of downside. Like he could lose his job, but he's super intriguing to me. He's got the 800+ yards rushing in college. That leads to in my rookie quarterback model 34.6 rushing yards per game expected for him. He had 828 yards and 11 touchdowns in his final college season. He was good against the Cowboys, 11 for 19 for 169 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I think that was in week 18. He had 35 yards exactly and a touchdown as a runner in that game. In the preseason, he had 443 for 69 for 547 yards, 7.9 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception in the preseason last year. He also had 94 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on 13 attempts in the preseason. That's about 45 fantasy points and 2 to 3 games of work. He's going QB 30, QB 27, somewhere in that range. I have him in the top 20. I think in 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues, he's a great guy to have as your 3rd quarterback, and I would even roll with him as my 2nd. You can also get Jacoby Brissett super late if you wanted to give yourself some kind of insurance on that. But, I think the big question here is Ron Rivera, but I think Eric Bieniemy is going to have more of a say as to who the quarterback is than Ron Rivera at this point. And they seem very comfortable with Howell as a starter. Plus he's got a great receiving core. I mean, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, 3, I would say, underrated receivers, Antonio Gibson in the backfield. So he's got a lot of tools to work with.
Including his carries in the first preseason game against the Browns, Pat. Going back to last preseason, Sam Howell now has 19 carries on 137 dropbacks, 13.5% scramble rate. Quarterback ADP has been the most accurate of any position the last few years, and I think it's because everyone understands that rushing quarterbacks are, to quote our friend Rich Rebar, a Konami code. They are a cheat code in the game of fantasy football. But for some reason, Sam Howell's ADP hasn't adjusted to it. And so I do believe he is the player, if I'm waiting, especially if you're thinking 2nd starting quarterback in Superflex leagues, just a backup because you waited too long at the position. Sam Howell's the guy I am totally comfortable running out.
He is the guy, and he's really the only option, because you're not going to find that rushing upside beyond the QB 17 or 18. Like you said, I don't really understand how the ADP has remained so stuck in neutral. Maybe there was this Jacoby Brissett fear for a while, and he could be really bad, but it would not be the first time we've had, as long as he's not who is Sam Ellinger bad, we're fine, folks.
Ian Book bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Book's the bar for how bad you can be.
And Sam Ellinger, we were kind of relying on the legs too, weren't we? He just needs to be better than Sam Ellinger, and we're fine. And the conversation inspired. I tweeted while we were talking, Anthony Richardson at ADP or Sam Howell at ADP. And I just feel like it is a question that's not being asked enough this summer. So I'm glad we just did.
I wrote that he's arbitrage for Anthony Richardson. I mean, I think Richardson's ADP is going to climb. I moved him up a spot because now he's named the starter. But I mean, what's the huge difference between these two?
Anthony Richardson's still Superman.
There is, he is, as Kyle Dvorchak always says, he's Derrick Henry in a quarterback's body. Sam Howell is decidedly not that.
Okay, that's the difference.
I'm glad you're sticking around for the last one, though, Paulson, because I want to talk about Jayden Reed. We discuss using ADP on ambiguous situations. And not only does Jayden Reed have better draft capital, number 50 overall pick, than fourth-round Romeo Doubs last year, but Reed, when discussing young players performing well in college, as an 18-year-old, Reed actually outperformed D. Eskridge at Western Michigan when they played together. Jayden Reed had 797 yards and 8 touchdowns to Eskridge's 3 touchdowns. Reed also a player they can't possibly take off the field. 3 wide sets to start the year, yes, but with 200-plus career receptions, 20-plus career carries, has thrown a touchdown in college, 15 yards per punt return, 20 yards per kick return. He's the kind of player who does it all and can power targets from the slot because he plays so much bigger than his size. So I will have a lot of Jayden Reed in redraft leagues.
Yeah, I'll field this just because I'm a Packer fan.
I was just waiting for the Packers aficionado to weigh in.
I mean, I had both of these players listed here as potential people to talk about. So Doubs and Reed, because Doubs supposedly has looked like Jordan Love's number 1 target in camp. He does have a good contested catch rate. He's not, according to reception perception, a very good route runner. You don't see him get a lot of separation. Jayden Reed, I'm really excited about. He conversely, Matt Harmon loves his route running coming out of college, and he looks great. I just think it's going to take some time for him to sort of get into two receiver sets, and I don't think that they're going to be playing, Reed 70, 80, 90% of the snaps to start. They do seem like they want to run some 2 tight end sets. He was in the preseason only out there for 60 or 70% of the snaps. So that's my concern with Reed. And I do think that Jordan Love is looking a little bit better as a sleeper. His first preseason game, he looked pretty sharp. He missed 1 throw, but he had a couple dimes, looked pretty poised. I don't think he's going to run much. He should, according to my model, run about 14 yards per game. He didn't look like he was interested in scrambling at all, but that might just be a preseason situation. But this is a young receiving core, and they're going to have some growing pains. I do think at cost, Reed is probably the better bet than Doubs just because of a talent standpoint. But I think Doubs is going to dominate snaps early on.
Just beyond his team-specific stuff, Reed and the Packers, I'll just say too, Reed, every year there's like some rookie receivers the market just falls totally asleep on because they don't like the situation. They don't like the quarterback, whatever. And he's a top 50 pick with essentially no buzz whatsoever. And everyone gets buzz in the kind of circles we're in, but he's not getting buzz with like the general public. And those kind of guys with that real life draft capital always make for really fine late round 0 cost flyers.
As they would say in the SEO world, we just gave everyone 9 league winning ultimate sleepers. Pat, tell everyone where they can find your work.
It's at this place called rotoworld.com, and
we're back.
ROTO Pat on the Twitter machine. John Revin, I had an article up last week where I tried to rank the fantasy offenses kind of for like tie-breaking purposes, because if you don't see a difference between player A and player B, overall offense environment, it's always a really good place to start. And I included a fantasy dark horse for all 32 teams. Check that out. We're updating our draft guide all the time, which John has taken part in the past. It's a really good product still. And yeah, grinding the news like we always do. And by the way, you may be wondering where our Twitter account has been. All I can say is that it will be back. We had a little snafu with our site changeover and our news tweets. It's coming back, folks. So don't worry. It is not gone. It is only sleeping.
Dynasty Champ has already sniped it.
Took
it offline.
It's only sleeping. It'll be back very soon.
Paulson, what else do you have going on at the site for everyone right now?
I've been writing my breakouts, sleepers, and values articles. Knocked out the first 3. Got wide receivers coming this week. And then I'm going to be rolling out week 1 projections. I've been asked to do that. So that is like probably my least favorite task in mid-August to be doing. But I'm going to go ahead and get it done this week.
Team previews of mine and my favorite sleepers, some that we didn't discuss on today's show, on the site for 4 for 4 subs right now, $39 pro subscription all year long. Until then, we will be back next week with 2 more episodes as we understand it's crunch time and we're trying to get you ready for your draft. So like and subscribe while you're here. Until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.